Hello students, welcome back to my channel. Today let's learn a lesson named as A Tiger in the House. It's written by Ruskin Bond. He is an Indian author and he has authored more than 500 short stories, essays and novels, which include 69 books for children. So let's start with the lesson today. Timothy, the tiger cub, was discovered by grandfather on a hunting expedition in the Terai jungle near Dera. At first, the tiger cub, who was named Timothy by grandmother, was brought up entirely on milk given to him in a feeding bottle by our cook Mahmood. But the milk proved too rich for him and he was put on a diet of raw mutton and cod liver oil, to be followed later by a more tempting diet of pigeons and rabbits. Timothy was provided with two companions, Toto the monkey, who was bold enough to pull the young tiger by the tail and then climb up the curtains if Timothy lost his temper, and a small mongrel puppy found on the road by grandfather. The story begins with the tiger cub, who was named Timothy, and he was discovered by grandfather on a hunting expedition in the Terai jungle near Dera. What do you mean by hunting expedition? A hunting journey. The tiger cub was named Timothy by grandmother, and in the beginning it was given only milk, that too in a feeding bottle, by the cook Mahmood. But the milk was too much for him and he was put on a diet of raw mutton and cod liver oil, and later it was given a diet of pigeons and rabbits. Now Timothy, the tiger cub, was having two companions, Toto the monkey, and the monkey was so bold enough to pull the young tiger by the tail, and if Timothy lost his temper, he would get angry, the monkey would climb up the curtains so that he becomes safe from the tiger. And the other companion was a small mongrel puppy found on the road by grandfather. What do you mean by mongrel? Dog whose parents were of different breeds. At first, Timothy appeared to be quite afraid of the puppy and darted back with a spring if it came too near. He would make absurd dashes at it with his large forepaws and then retreat to a ridiculously safe distance. Finally, he allowed the puppy to crawl on his back and rest there. One of Timothy's favorite amusements was to stalk anyone who would play with him, and so when I came to live with grandfather, I became one of Tiger's favorites. With a crafty look in his glittering eyes and his body crouching, he would creep closer and closer to me, suddenly making a dash for my feet, rolling over on his back and kicking with delight and pretending to bite my ankles. In the beginning, Timothy was very afraid of the puppy, and whenever the puppy would come near him, the tiger cub, that is Timothy, would dart back, that is spring back. He would jump back very quickly and he would make absurd dashes. What do you mean by absurd dashes? A sudden quick run that looked very funny, using his forepaws, the front paws, and then he would be in a safe distance from the puppy. Finally, he got along with the puppy and he allowed the puppy to crawl on his back and rest there. One of Timothy's favorite amusements was to stalk anyone who would play with him. What do you mean by stalk? Follow quietly as if hunting. He would play with them. And when I came to live with grandfather, that is the writer Ruskin Bond, when he came to live with his grandfather, he became one of the tiger's favorites. Now, with a crafty look in his glittering eyes. What do you mean by crafty look? Cleverly deceitful look. The tiger cub would creep closer and closer to the writer and suddenly jump on his feet, rolling over on his back and kicking with happiness, delight, and pretending to bite his ankles. He would just play with him. He was by this time the size of a full-grown retriever, and when I took him out for walks, people on the road would give us a wide berth. When he pulled hard on his chain, I had difficulty in keeping up with him. His favorite place in the house was the drawing room, and he would make himself comfortable on the long sofa, reclining there with great dignity and snarling at anybody who tried to get him off. Timothy had clean habits and would scrub his face with his paws exactly like a cat. He slept at night in the cook's quarters and was always delighted at being let out by him in the morning. Now, Timothy, the tiger cub, he had grown into a size of a full-grown retriever. What's a retriever? Middle-sized hunting dog. And when the writer would take Timothy for walks, people on the road would get scared and give them a wide berth. What do you mean by wide berth? Stayed at a safe distance. They were scared of the tiger. And whenever the tiger would pull hard on the chain that was tied to him, the writer, Ruskin Bond, would find difficulty in keeping up with him. It was difficult to manage him. And in the house, his favorite place was the drawing room. And he would make himself very comfortable on the long sofa. And he would recline there with great dignity and snarling at anybody who tried to get him off. What do you mean by snarling? Showed the teeth and made a deep, angry noise in the throat. He would scare the person who would try to take him away from that sofa. The tiger cub, Timothy, he had clean habits and he would scrub his face with his paws exactly like a cat. It belonged to a cat family. It would behave like a cat. He slept at night in the cook's quarter in Mahmud's room and was always delighted. He would be very happy in the morning when Mahmud would let him out. One of these days, declared grandmother in her prophetic manner, we are going to find Timothy sitting on Mahmud's bed and no sign of the cook except his clothes and shoes. Of course, it never came to that, but when Timothy was about 6 months old, a change came over him. He grew steadily less friendly. When out for a walk with me, he would try to steal away to stalk a cat or someone's pet Pekingese. Sometimes at night we would hear frenzied cackling from the poultry house, and in the morning there would be feathers lying all over the veranda. Timothy had to be chained up more often, and finally when he began to stalk Mahmud about the house with what looked like villainous intent, grandfather decided it was time to transfer him to a zoo. Now the grandmother would tell in a prophetic manner. What do you mean by prophetic manner? Manner of saying things in advance. Something that's going to happen in the future. So what does she say? She says, one of these days we are going to find Timothy sitting on Mahmud's bed and there will be no sign of the cook except his clothes and shoes. That is, the tiger was growing so quickly that he might eat Mahmud one day and we will not have the cook. But of course, it never came to that. But when Timothy was about 6 months old, they saw a change in him. He grew steadily less friendly. And whenever he would go for a walk with the writer, he would try to steal away to stalk a cat or someone's pet Pekingese. What is Pekingese? It is a type of a dog. It was getting difficult to control him. And sometimes at night, people in the house could hear frenzied cackling. What is frenzied? Extremely disturbing voices from the poultry house. And in the morning, there would be feathers lying all over the veranda. That is, he would have eaten the chickens there. Timothy had to be chained up more often because he was growing so quickly and he was getting aggressive too. And finally, when he began to stalk Mahmud, the cook, with a villainous intent, as if he was about to eat him, grandfather decided it was time to transfer him to a zoo. It is difficult to maintain him here. If we keep him, he might kill somebody. So it is better to transfer him to a zoo. The nearest zoo was at Lucknow, 200 miles away. Reserving a first-class compartment for himself and Timothy, no one would share a compartment with them. Grandfather took him to Lucknow, where the zoo authorities were only too glad to receive as a gift a well-fed and fairly civilized tiger. About 6 months later, when my grandparents were visiting relatives in Lucknow, grandfather took the opportunity of calling at the zoo to see how Timothy was getting on. I was not there to accompany him, but I heard all about it when he returned to Dera. Now the nearest zoo was at Lucknow, 200 miles away from Dera. So what did the grandfather do? he reserved a first class compartment for himself and Timothy, and no one was ready to share a compartment with them. Everyone was scared of the tiger. Now, grandfather reached Lucknow. He went to the zoo, and there the zoo authorities, the people in charge, they were so happy to receive such a well-fed and civilized tiger. They were very happy because it was in a very good health. And about 6 months later, his grandparents, the writer's grandparents, were visiting relatives in Lucknow. So the grandfather thought this is the best opportunity of going to the zoo and meeting Timothy. Now the writer could not accompany him, but he heard everything that happened over there after his grandfather returned to Dera. Arriving at the zoo, grandfather made straight for the particular cage in which Timothy had been interned. The tiger was there, crouched in a corner, full grown and with a magnificent striped coat. The tiger approached the bars and allowed grandfather to put both hands around his head. Grandfather stroked the tiger's forehead and tickled his ear, and whenever he growled, smacked him across the mouth, which was his old way of keeping him quiet. So what happened there? Arriving at the zoo, grandfather, he went straight to the particular cage where Timothy had been interned when he had left him. So he knew where the tiger was, so he straightly went to that place. And the tiger was there in that cage. He was sitting in a corner, he was full grown, and the magnificent striped coat, that is the yellow and the black color, was beautiful. The tiger approached the bars. That is, he came near the grandfather and he allowed the grandfather to put both hands around his head. And grandfather started stroking the tiger's forehead and tickling his ears. And whenever he growled, he made a noise, he would smack him, hit him across the mouth, which was an old way of keeping him quiet. He used to do that when he was young. He licked grandfather's hands and only sprang away when a leopard in the next cage snarled at him. Grandfather shooed the leopard away and the tiger returned to lick his hands. But every now and then the leopard would rush at the bars and the tiger would sling back to his corner. A number of people had gathered to watch the reunion when a keeper pushed his way through the crowd and asked grandfather what he was doing. "I am talking to Timothy," said grandfather. "Weren't you here when I gave him to the zoo 6 months ago?" "I haven't been here very long," said the surprised keeper. "Please continue your conversation, but I have never been able to touch him myself. He is always very bad-tempered. Why don't you put him somewhere else?" suggested grandfather. "That leopard keeps frightening him. I will go and see the superintendent about it." Now the tiger, he started licking grandfather's hands, and he would jump away when he was getting scared from the leopard in the next cage, which would growl at him, scare him. And grandfather shooed the leopard away, and the tiger would return back and start licking his hands. But every now and then the leopard would come towards the bar and scare the tiger, and the tiger would be scared and go back to a corner. Looking at grandfather and the tiger playing, all the people around, they started gathering there and they were watching the reunion. A zookeeper, he pushed his way. He came through the crowd and he asked grandfather what he was doing. So the grandfather says, "I am talking to Timothy. You were not here when I gave him to zoo 6 months ago?" So the zookeeper was very surprised and he said, "I haven't been here very long. I am new over here and you please continue your conversation with the tiger, but I am very scared of this tiger because he is always in a very bad temper and I have never been able to touch him." So the grandfather says, "Why don't you transfer him to some other cage, because that leopard keeps frightening him?" And then grandfather says, "I will go and see the superintendent about it, the man in charge of the zoo." Grandfather went in search of the superintendent of the zoo, but found that he had gone home early. And so, after wandering about the zoo for a little while, he returned to Timothy's cage to say goodbye. It was beginning to get dark. He had been stroking and slapping Timothy for about 5 minutes when he found another keeper observing him with some alarm. Grandfather recognized him as the keeper who had been there when Timothy had first come to the zoo. "You remember me," said grandfather. Now, why don't you transfer Timothy to another cage away from the stupid leopard? But sir, stammered the keeper, it is not your tiger. I know, said grandfather testily. I realized he is no longer mine, but you might at least take a suggestion or two from me. Now the grandfather went in search of the superintendent of the zoo, but he came to know that he had gone home early, so he didn't meet him. And after roaming about the zoo for a little while, he returned back to Timothy's cage to say goodbye because it was getting very dark. Now he had been stroking and slapping Timothy for about 5 minutes. There was another keeper who was observing him, and grandfather recognized this keeper who had been there when Timothy had first come to zoo. When he came to leave Timothy to the zoo, that zookeeper was there. So grandfather says him, you remember me. Why don't you transfer Timothy to another cage away from this stupid leopard? It keeps scaring him. Now the keeper, he started stammering. He was scared and he said, sir, it is not your tiger. So grandfather testily, what do you mean by testily? Impatiently. He said, I know. I have given you this tiger. It doesn't belong to me anymore. But you might take at least a suggestion from me. It is scaring the tiger. I remember your tiger very well, said the keeper. He died 2 months ago. Died? Exclaimed grandfather. Yes, sir, of pneumonia. This tiger was trapped in the hills only last month and is very dangerous. Grandfather could think of nothing to say. The tiger was still licking his arm with increasing relish. Grandfather took what seemed to him an age to withdraw his hand from the cage. With his face near the tiger's, he mumbled, Good night, Timothy, and giving the keeper a scornful look, walked briskly out of the zoo. The keeper, he says, I remember your tiger very well, sir. It died 2 months ago. Now grandfather was shocked and he said, died? Now the zookeeper says, yes, sir. He died because of pneumonia. And this tiger was trapped in the hills only last month and he is very dangerous. Now grandfather, he could not think of anything. He was blank and he saw that the tiger was still licking his arm with increasing relish. What is relish? More and more liking. Now with his face near the tiger's, he mumbled, he said in a very soft voice, Good night, Timothy. And he looked at the keeper with a scornful look. What is scornful look? Look of disrespect. And he walked away from the zoo very quickly. He left the zoo. He was very upset. I do hope you don't have any doubts in this lesson. In case you do, you can comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more interesting videos. Thank you and stay safe.